Hi, friends. Father Kerry Walters here, pastor of Holy Spirit American National Catholic Church. And this is another Holy Spirit moment, this one on patience in a time of pestilence. As I record this, you and I are in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. We have been practicing social distancing for a few weeks now, and in many states there is a stay-at-home order that has been issued in the hope of leveling out the infection rate. It could well be the case that many of us are beginning to suffer from impatience with the situation. We are feeling overwhelmed, perhaps with anxiety and fear and maybe anger. And as a consequence, we simply want the situation to be over and done so that we can return to some semblance of normalcy. We are impatient for a change in our lives. You know, our Christian ancestors thought and wrote a great deal about the virtue of patience because they likewise were experiencing bouts of impatience in a crisis. They were experiencing persecution for the faith, and that made many of them long for a time in which that persecution would be over and done with, to be impatient for that virus pandemic if we take a quick look at what they have to say about patience. St. Gregory the Great in the 6th century actually thought so highly of patience that he called it the root and the standard of all of the virtues. So what is patience? Well, I think St. Augustine in the 5th century offers us the very best definition that comes out of those years. It's in a little treatise of his entitled, appropriately enough, On Patience. And this is what Augustine says. The virtue of patience, he writes, by which we tolerate evil things with an evil mind, that we may not with a mind uneven desert good things. Let me repeat that. The virtue of patience is that by which we tolerate evil things with an even mind, so that we may not with a mind uneven desert good things. What Augustine is saying is something like this. Patience is that disposition which allows us to bear with an even keel, with mindfulness, with centeredness, undesirable situations, such that we won't be so discombobulated that we can no longer pay attention to good situations. We won't be chickens running around with our heads cut off, as it were, focused so intently and obsessively and irrationally on what we consider to be an undesirable situation or even a threat that we lose sight of the good. Now that's an important, it seems to me, definition of patience. And the evil that Augustine is talking about, I believe, can be looked at in one of two ways. The first way that we can think of evil in this understanding of what patience is simply this. Evil is the absence of what we long for in the here and now. It's a kind of negative understanding of evil, isn't it? It can be as mundane as me longing for my birthday party, which is a few months away, because I'll have a lot of fun in it. My friends and my family will be there, and I'll get gifts, and I'm impatient for the day to arrive. A less mundane version of that kind of evil is, I think, given to us in the wonderful novel Zorba the Greek by Nikos Kazantzakis. One of the characters happens to see a chrysalis on a branch, and the chrysalis is beginning to move to give a sign that the butterfly that's formed inside it is getting ready to spread its wings. The chrysalis is ready to break open. And so the man breaks off the chrysalis and, impatient for the miracle of birth, breathes upon the chrysalis in the hope that the warmth of his breath will accelerate the process, and it does. But it over-accelerates it, and what emerges instead of a beautiful butterfly is a crushed and dying creature. So impatience can hasten what ought not to be hastened. Impatience can lead us to rush where we ought not to rush. But there's another evil that impatience is a response to, and it is an evil that is a present danger, a present threat to our well being, such as the coronavirus pandemic. And the kind of impatience that responds to a present threat is one which simply wants it to be gone, wants it to be gone right now. The first kind of impatience wants the good thing to be present right now. The second kind of impatience wants the evil or bad or threatening or frightening thing to be gone right now. When we forbear those two kinds of impatiences and instead cultivate patience, that is, a disposition to accept the unavoidability of some evil without allowing it to distract our minds to the extent that we can no longer focus on the good. When we practice that kind of patience, that virtue, says Tertullian, we imitate God because God is patient with us. Otherwise, God would smite all of us because of our wickedness, says Tertullian. But God is willing to put up with us, if I can put it that way. God is willing to bear with us, with our present evil of wickedness, for the sake of a greater good. That is, the hope that we will convert and be saved sometime in the future. And when you and I practice patience, in imitation of divine patience, we do the same thing, don't we? We put up with unpleasant situations by keeping our eyes on the good that is down the road. Or we put up with the unfair treatment that others may throw at us, recognizing that they may change to the better for the good in the future. Patience, then, is the willingness to look beyond a present evil, be it an absent or be it a present evil, and to keep one's eyes fixed upon the good. St. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century also talked about the virtue of patience. And Thomas Aquinas sees all virtue as our safeguards, if you will, against being led into irrational directions by our passions. Each of the virtues safeguards against a specific vice or passion. So, for example, courage, the virtue of courage, safeguards us against two different kinds of passions. The passion of foolhardiness on the one hand and the passion of cowardice or excessive fearfulness on the other. Well, what's the passion that patience safeguards us against? According to Thomas Aquinas, it's sorrow. Sorrow can cause us to begin to think irrationally, or to use Augustine's phrase, to be of an uneven mind, such that we can become overwhelmed and obsessive about the cause of our sorrow, such that we just can't see beyond it anymore. We immerse ourselves into it. We drown in it. Patience, on the other hand, once again, is that disposition to recognize and accept unavoidable evils by keeping our mind fixed on the realization that they are temporary and that there is something better down the road. I think that's especially important for us to recognize in this time of the coronavirus pandemic, because things aren't likely to improve for some time, according to all of the medical testimony that we've been hearing. So it's extremely important, seems to me, to not allow sorrow for what we've seemed to have lost and for what we yearn to return to overwhelm us. And we can avoid that possibility by practicing patience. Tertullian warns us not to confuse patience with two different kinds of masquerades. The first he calls, in a wonderful phrase, canine equilibrium. We might call it bovine or cow-like complacency today. Think of a dog lying in front of a fire, snoozing away, and not having a care in the world, even if the house is burning down around him. Patience is not indifference to evil, is not stupidity when it comes to evil. Patience recognizes the reality of evil, either the absent thing which is desired or the present thing which is feared. It doesn't run from it. It simply refuses to allow it to discombobulate the mind such that the spirit is crushed. And the second masquerade of patience is what Tertullian calls wicked forbearance. We ought not to ever presume that simply because a wicked person waits out events, looking for a favorable situation in which to practice his or her wickedness, that he or she is in fact displaying patience. Not at all. Think of a burglar, for example, who cases out a house that he or she wants to burgle and then waits seemingly patiently for the occupants of the house to leave so that the crime can be committed. Tertullian says this is impatience because patience always is aimed toward the good. Why is that? Because patience is a virtue, and virtues always aim towards the good, always aim towards genuine well-being, such that St. Gregory can say that, as we've seen, that patience is the root and the standard of all virtues. In order to truly exercise wisdom, in order to truly exercise the virtue of courage or love or any of the other virtues, one needs to accompany them with patience, to know when the time is right for acting and when the time isn't. In that regard, patience seems to be a kind of second cousin to what Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas call prudence, the importance of knowing when to act and how to act. So, my friends, in this pandemic that you and I find ourselves in this time of pestilence, I think that one of the best ways to deal with it is to recognize the importance of patience and to begin to cultivate the even-mindedness that St. Augustine calls patience. We recognize that there is an ever-present threat to us as long as the pandemic lasts, but we also recognize that it can't and shouldn't be allowed to enslave our mind and our spirit, because it is temporary and the good will return. I'm Father Kerry Walters, and this has been another Holy Spirit moment. Stay safe, be well. I'll see you next time.